Hello students, this is the video lecture about adversarial journalism that I'm doing for JMS 200 based on a particular chapter from the Mindich textbook. This textbook chapter is towards the end of the textbook. I decided to move it up front because I think the topic is important and I really wanted to stress adversarial journalism. I'm standing in front of an Amazon warehouse down near the border. It's on Otay Mesa Road. I came down here to buy some Spanish language comic books from someone who was selling them on Facebook Marketplace. I don't know Spanish. I should, lo siento. I don't know Spanish, but living in San Diego, I should. But, I like weird stuff. And the guy had some Daredevil comics. So I drove down here. Was this the best, most productive use of 30 minutes of my time coming down here? Maybe not, but, it's fun. And anyway, okay, so now I'm going to do the lecture, which has nothing to do with Spanish language comic books. But whatever, this is what I did this morning. I thought it would be fun to do this little intro. Okay, students, this is the start of the actual lecture. At this point, you should be paying serious attention. Two theories, which we have already discussed at this point, but are worth keeping in mind as we go through the rest of this lecture: agenda setting and then gatekeeping. Okay, the concepts of agenda setting or gatekeeping are very important to what we're discussing here in this particular video lecture. And gatekeeping is especially relevant when it comes to politics. Many times during, say, a presidential election, there could be many different potential candidates, sometimes 12, 13 from one political party trying to get that top spot to be the nominee for president. The press will typically gravitate towards two or three that the press deems are the most viable candidates. And then lo and behold, those people gain more popularity, and one of them, usually a man, as of this recording, becomes the eventual nominee. So the power of gatekeeping is very important when it comes to politics. The textbook also talks about the press as fourth estate. This is a very powerful and important and useful metaphor. I think it is a useful metaphor and a really good concept. In the United States, we have three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. You probably learned this in your high school civics class or something like that. Well, the press is often depicted to be the unofficial fourth branch or fourth estate, providing another system of checks and balances. If politicians or public officials are doing something wrong, something nefarious, you have the reporters to say, hey, we've busted you, we've caught you, we've exposed you. That sort of keeps people in check. So the concept of the press as a fourth estate makes nice sense from the American perspective. However, there's always a however. As the textbook specifies, the metaphor originated in England. If you are ever asked, where did the metaphor of the press as fourth estate originate? It's England. Take a look at that section in the textbook. Now, I'm going to stress adversarial journalism. That's what I wanted to really stress. That's why I'm calling the lecture Adversarial Journalism. This is sort of the watchdog function of the press, checks and balances that I already enumerated. Watergate is a term. Watergate was originally a hotel. I think it still is a hotel in Washington, D.C., but it's become known as sort of the biggest scandal, the biggest expose of corruption of the last several decades, at least in American history. The Nixon administration was doing a whole host of illegal activities. There were two reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, who did a little story, and then they kept pulling at this thread, and then eventually a whole range of corruption was exposed. They worked for the Washington Post. Woodward and Bernstein worked for the Washington Post. There's a famous story, dramatization of their work. It's called All the President's Men, become a big hit movie. It's a big movie. If you have time, you should probably watch it. It's pretty good. And yeah, it basically, President Nixon resigned, the only president in U.S. history so far to resign because of everything that had been exposed. Deep Throat was an FBI associate who for many years, kept his identity private, but he was feeding information to Woodward and Bernstein. The name Deep Throat at the time was a very popular adult film. So when this undercover informant wanted to keep his identity secret, he said, refer to me as Deep Throat. He was making an allusion to this adult film at the time. The term deep throat has now become kind of a slang term for an undercover informant. A reporter might say, "Who was your deep throat?" or something like that. This is what they're talking about. The original Watergate scandal, someone feeding information. And then later, many years later, we discovered the identity, that it was an FBI associate, Mark Felt. I just want to stress here, because this is not mentioned in the textbook, but a significant chunk of original news comes from local newspapers. Even though the old distribution method of print news is going away and we're having fewer and fewer actual hard copies of newspapers, these media outlets, which still call themselves newspapers, are where so many stories come from, because these local newspapers have people going to city hall and town council meetings and talking to the press, talking to the police at police stations. This is where original stories begin, and then maybe a larger media outlet will pick it up, and then maybe you will read about it on a social media platform like X or Instagram or Facebook or something like that. But they originate with these local media outlets, which is one reason why it's so discouraging and actually rather depressing that so many local media outlets are going out of business, ceasing publication, et cetera, et cetera. Because who's going to provide the original news? I mean, who is going to be generating these stories? Who is going to be providing checks and balances on local politicians and local officials? There was a very famous case in Bell, California, where there was no local media outlets at all. We call a place with no local news a news desert. And the people who were, in various city officials, they like tripled their pay or quadrupled their pay or something like that. They did it at a meeting, and they knew no one was going to object because the citizens just didn't know about it because there wasn't a single reporter there. So, if there was a reporter there and the mayor says, "Hey, I don't want a salary of 150,000, I want a salary of $500,000." Yeah, that's the kind of thing that public officials will try and get away with if they have no one providing checks and balances on them. So that's one of the reasons I think it's very discouraging that we're seeing a lot of local media outlets go out of business. All right, now I'm driving, looking for some Mexican food. Feels like I should eat Mexican food if I'm this far close to the border. Why was I standing in front of an Amazon warehouse? Because the guy I bought the comics from works for Amazon, lives in Mexico, comes across the border every day to work at Amazon. I didn't pick that just at random. There was a reason I'm there. I put in into my GPS an address of some Mexican restaurant that I thought would be fine. But I got a little lost, and when I looked up, I realized I was about to cross into Mexico, and I didn't want to get stuck in border crossing. So now I'm just aimlessly looking for the 805 to head my way back towards campus, and inshallah, I'll find some Mexican food somewhere in San Diego, right? Got to find some Mexican food. What goes into an investigative story? There's 4 items here listed by Mindich. You got a tip from a concerned citizen, sometimes called a whistleblower. You have an anonymous source, someone who supplies information but wants their name to be withheld or publication. Most reputable media outlets don't like to use anonymous sources unless they absolutely have to, but that's kind of frowned upon. It's not really great to grab information from someone who's not willing to reveal their identity, but sometimes people need to keep their identity secret for their own safety and well-being. If something is on the record, that is the official term when a person knows that the words that they're saying are likely to be reported and quoted. A FOIA request, this is something that's a very standard technique for journalists to use. It stands for Freedom of Information Act. We cover this in much more detail on JMS 494. You don't need to know all the details now, but simply know what a FOIA request is. Any individual, you don't have to be a reporter. Any individual can go to a government agency and say, "Hey, you're a public agency. You're supposed to provide records of what you've done and records of your activity, and you can file a FOIA request and get the information." It may take you some time. The information may not be as complete as you would like, but yes, you could request information from any kind of government agency. And then oftentimes we have reporters who have to dig beyond the official sources. Journalism is a dangerous business. I don't want to say this to dissuade people from becoming journalists because I think it's a very, very noble profession and something we need. We desperately need to remain a functioning democracy. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of journalists killed around the world. Not too long ago, there was a whole rash of killings of journalists in Mexico, people exposing government corruption and writing about the drug cartels. So it's a horrible, horrible situation. In 2023, there was many, many journalists killed covering the Israel-Gaza conflict. And we also have something called the chilling effect. You don't have to kill a lot of journalists or beat up journalists. You maybe only have to kill or beat up one, and that is going to scare everyone else and sort of make people tone down their activity. We call that a chilling effect. Chilling effect. Continuing on this theme of journalism as a dangerous business, we have the Committee to Protect Journalists. You can look up this organization online. They have a lot of very useful information. And one of the reasons why, or maybe a few of the reasons why we have this growing danger to journalists is the economic decline of media organizations. We have fewer international bureaus. We have fewer full-time international reporters. We have more and more freelancers and part-timers who have less protection in terms of personal security and healthcare coverage. And you may be thinking to yourself, Arsenault, I don't care about newspapers. I don't care about legacy TV. I don't care about that. I get my news from social media. These social media organizations like X or Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok, whatever the next thing is going to be, they do not have news bureaus. Okay. These social media platforms that I've named are distribution mechanisms. The New York Times actually has reporters stationed overseas. The Washington Post actually has reporters stationed overseas. Same with the AP and Reuters. They actually employ journalists. So these are the people who are producing the information, and we need people like this who know how to fact check information and provide reliable information. We need these to stay informed as a functioning democracy. And speaking of dangers to journalists, this individual killed in 2018. This was a huge story. I remember it. It was a very, very big story. Jamal Khashoggi, a U.S.-based journalist. He's originally a Saudi, or was a Saudi gentleman, was killed in Turkey. He was tricked to coming to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and he was killed. Actually, the killing was captured on audio. It was really, really quite horrific. And there doesn't seem to be any doubt. There doesn't seem to be any doubt that it was the Saudis or the Saudi royal family who killed this man because he was exposing some of the negative things that they were doing. And the United States really didn't do much about it. We really didn't say, just, really didn't do much about it. Probably because my personal theory, me on a soapbox, is that, Saudi Arabia is such a big ally and sells us so much oil that and buys so many of our weapons, we didn't want to do anything about it. But yeah, this was a pretty horrific case of a journalist being killed for the truthful information that he was bringing forth. Now we have a slide here about the relationship between the powerful and the press. And before I start talking about politicians here, I just want to talk about the issue of access and the nature of access. If you are a journalist covering any kind of institution or any kind of organization, you have to be able to talk to people, politicians, the police, professors at a university, scientists. If you are a reporter and you cover your local sporting team, you have to have access. And because you need access, you need to maintain positive relationships with the people that you are constantly interviewing and constantly quoting. Does this lead to reporters being overly friendly with the subject that they cover? Of course it does. Of course it does. If you see a documentary based on a person, the documentary is generally going to be positive. The more time you spend with someone, the more you tend to overlook their flaws and focus on the positive. And not to pick on sports, because I like sports, I watch sports. But if you're covering a team, that's your beat, and an athlete does something negative, which athletes are often do, beating up people or caught drunk driving or doing something weird with finances and betting. If you expose that person, that team or the coaches on that team may want to like ban you from the locker room or ban you from going to the games. That's not going to be a good situation if you have to cover a team. So do you think that kind of relationship makes reporters be a little kind and overly positive to people? Of course it does. Of course it does. The slide here that I'm looking at that we're talking about is about how politicians want to cultivate that and exploit that tendency of reporters by going on talk shows or entertainment shows or soft news shows where they know the person is going to be nice to them and they can tell jokes and they can be friendly and they're not going to get any kind of pressing question. Um, Here we have Biden on the show hosted by Seth Meyers. I can't even think of the name right now, but Seth is very known for being quite liberal when it comes to politics. He wasn't going to ask Biden any tough questions. This kind of relationship, where politicians want to exploit and take advantage of entertainment shows, was a milestone back when Clinton appeared on the Arsenio Hall show.
Tonight, Arsenio welcomes presidential candidate Governor Bill Clinton and actress Mary Garth. And now, Rolling Hills, Honolulu.
At the time, people thought that it was unpresidential and unseemly for a presidential candidate to play saxophone on a late night talk show. But Clinton got a lot of good press because of it, and he was eventually elected president. Clinton later got in trouble for the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal. Do you think Clinton going on the Arsenio Hall show made Arsenio Hall less likely to make really negative jokes about Bill Clinton? I think it did. I mean, I don't remember it that well, but I think Arsenio Hall was joking about Clinton, but he wasn't going to do some super hard hitting punches the way he would have had Clinton not cultivated this positive relationship. Here's some image from the textbook about adversarial journalism in the digital age. There was a big story in the early 2000s, began in the New York Times, about concussions in the NFL and how dangerous it was. So it begins with a print, or originally a print outlet, the New York Times, but the news is spread through all forms of social media and all kind of new different ways that media outlets have of reaching the consumer. The digital age presents challenges and opportunities for adversarial journalism. Today's audiences are very distracted. There's a lot of clutter. It can be hard to break through the clutter, but also, there's just new ways to reach the audience, and computers can provide sort of individuals or anonymous people who want to remain anonymous or whistleblowers to give confidential information to journalists. Success. I found a place. Knew I would. Wasn't doubtful about that. Got a burrito, California burrito. Asada. That's what the kind woman working behind the counter recommended. She said that's the popular one. And she also sold me a Mexican Coke, which I know that my son likes, so I just drank agua, and I'm bringing home a Mexican Coke for him. Now on to my office, where I'm actually going to record this lecture. Now we have new and continuing ventures in investigative journalism. The textbook also talks about ProPublica, a nonprofit organization, which is funded by different foundations. Interested in contributing to quality journalism. And there's a whole bunch of these. There's a whole bunch of sort of nonprofit ways of supporting good quality journalism because of the decline in advertising and the decline in newspaper circulation and other economic challenges. Media outlets finding it harder to survive. So people are trying to find new models, maybe even nonprofit models. And then we also have a rise in hyper-local news outlets. Hyper-local, I mean, local news has always been considered important, but rather than covering something like San Diego, you might only cover one region within San Diego, or a particular aspect of San Diego, like the prison system or the educational system or something like that. And we have, I'm glad to see that Mindich put this in here, the late night comedy model of news. Here's some examples that he's mentioned here. John Oliver, I love John Oliver. I think John Oliver's hilarious. I don't think it's bad if individuals get their news from comedians. I don't think it's bad. I think it's maybe a little odd, but I don't think it's bad. If you want to watch one of these very politically oriented comedy shows, you need to be pretty smart and you need to be up on the news to get the jokes. And if you're finding out the information from a comedian, I don't think that's necessarily bad. I don't think that's necessarily bad. And I just want to throw in my 2 cents here on that, editorial cartoons have always been a part of newspapers, which use humor to convey an important point. So if you found out your news through the Daily Show, I think that's totally fine. At least you're getting the news. Now, just to come back and sort of get back on my soapbox again, American democracy relies upon having an informed electorate, right? Everyone over the age of 18 or 18 and above, we get to vote. I assume anyone watching this lecture has got to be over the age of 18. I can't imagine a kid wants to watch this thing. So when you go to vote, what are you going to vote for? Just someone whose name you like, or your parents or your boyfriend, your girlfriend told you to vote for them? No, you ought to have your own opinion. You ought to have an informed opinion. Okay. But shockingly, and this seems to be getting worse, American public is pretty uneducated about some basic political facts, and younger people are consuming less and less news than previous generations. I'm going to play a clip here. I found this online. The video was made in San Diego, and some people who don't know just pretty fundamental information about the founding of the United States and July 4th. It's funny, but it's also a little depressing.
What country famously broke away from England to start their own country in the late 1700s?
I have no idea, man. I don't know.
What are we celebrating on the 4th of July exactly?
Our independence.
A little more specific.
It's the day that we overtook the South. And it's the day that, it's our independence. That's why we have the fire.
From the South.
From the South, exactly.
So it was the victor of the Civil War?
Yes.
4th of July?
Yes.
The Declaration of Independence was signed by who?
I don't know.
Just name one person.
Abraham Lincoln? I don't know.
Sorry.
Not?
What year was that Declaration of
Was it
Independence?
1964? 84?
1984.
84? I don't know.
No. We're in
1864?
1860.
I don't know.
This country, no wonder this country's in trouble. Okay. What country did we declare our independence from?
Help me, baby.
Nope, just you. You're on your own.
California. California.
From.
Oh, from?
We declared independence from a certain country, which is why we celebrate 4th of July. What country was that?
I don't have no idea.
You're going to be celebrating, though?
Yes. Yes.
But you don't know what you're celebrating.
You're right. You're right.
Okay. That's tonight's homework assignment.
Okay.
In conclusion, we have a slide here called Democracy, Media, and the Health of the Electorate. Americans consume less traditional news than before, but many people get their news from different social media sites, including Facebook and X. In some instances, about something very, very specific, like Black Lives Matter or Israel Gaza or trans rights issues, something like that, there may be specific issues where younger people know a lot because they get very passionate about and they get really, really into that topic. But they may not know about other stuff as well. In general, younger Americans are less informed than their elders about names and affiliations in politics. And as the video indicated, might be pretty ignorant about some pretty fundamental facts. All right, that's it. Video's done. And I'm just going to end the video. You've answered the questions at this point with some images of the comic books that I got down in Otay Mesa. Anyway, not only did I get the Daredevil comic book, I was pretty excited to see Phantom Menace. Horrible, the worst Star Wars movie, but nevertheless, I got a Spanish language version of the comic book, and that thrills me because I'm so geeky. Anyway, interpret that as you will.